He is an inspiration to many of you, and he's an inspiration to millions of people around the world. Will you please welcome Omar Barghouti?
Thank you very much. Thanks PSC, Ben, Lewis, and everyone who has worked on this very important conference. Last month, the International Court of Justice, as was mentioned, ruled overwhelmingly that Israel's occupation of Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is illegal, that Israel is practicing apartheid, that its settlements must be dismantled, and that Palestinian refugees have a right to return. This is a crucial step forward in our struggle to dismantle 76 years of Israel's regime of settler colonialism and apartheid. But Palestinians have no illusions whatsoever that justice will shine on us from The Hague or from the UN head office in Geneva or New York. The utter failure of the international legal system, dominated by the Euro-American colonial powers, to provide the necessary legally binding foundation for even stopping the unspeakable Israeli genocide in Gaza, the world's first televised genocide, let alone delivering justice, speaks volumes. We have international law on our side. We have the moral high ground as an indigenous people fighting a ruthless, depraved, genocidal settler colonial regime to achieve our liberation. Ethics and the law are necessary in our and in every other liberation struggle, but they are never sufficient. To dismantle a system of oppression, the oppressed invariably need power as well. People power, grassroots power, intersectional coalition power, solidarity power, media power, among other forms. Israeli airstrikes lately, as we've heard early this morning as well, have focused on massacring forcibly displaced Palestinians sheltering in United Nations schools in particular, in so-called safe zones. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food has said, quote, "Every Palestinian in Gaza is now facing famine because of Israel's intentional and targeted starvation campaign. The recent deaths of more Palestinian children tells us everything," end of quote. These are all symptoms of Israel's genocide against 2.3 million Palestinians in the occupied and besieged Gaza Strip. This shockingly reveals not only the level of Israel's dehumanization of indigenous Palestinians and what the UN Secretary General calls total impunity, but also the unprecedented level of Western complicity. By perpetrating the world's first televised genocide, Israel is experimenting with a new paradigm of might makes right. Colonial powers that share with Israel what Naomi Klein calls a supremacist vision of safety and security for the few may then emulate Israel's paradigm to exterminate or crush weaker nations and racialized communities that, in seeking justice, dare to defy systems of domination and subjugation. Since oppression is the root cause of violence, those of us who sincerely care about ending all violence must act to end oppression. As the struggle that ended apartheid in South Africa has shown, ending state, corporate, and institutional complicity in Israel's system of oppression, especially through the nonviolent tactics of boycott, divestment, and sanctions, is the most effective form of solidarity. Palestinians are not begging the world for charity. We're calling for meaningful solidarity. But before both, we are demanding an end to complicity. Many stand in solidarity with Palestinians out of the strong belief that justice is indivisible, as Angela Davis says, and that this engenders an ethical duty to consistently stand in international solidarity with struggles against oppression anywhere. Others support our rights because they understand that Palestinian liberation is intersectionally connected with struggles for racial, indigenous, economic, social, gender, and climate justice worldwide. Israel's regime of oppression is, in fact, after all, a model for much of the world's authoritarian rulers and for the rising security state in the West. It harms not only Palestinians, but also tens of millions worldwide. Israel today is a partner of fascist groups in the West, most of whom are anti-Semitic to the core, and of far-right regimes. It sells its military security technologies and colonial doctrines as battle-tested, of course, on Palestinians and other Arabs. From the export of weaponized spyware technologies and its disinformation and election rigging services as a diplomacy tool, Israel has for decades been a culprit in not just illegal surveillance and influence in the West, but also war crimes perpetrated by dictatorships everywhere. But the most profound ethical obligation in situations of oppression is to do no harm and to repair harm done by you or in your name. When thousands of progressive Jewish Americans peacefully occupied the Grand Central Station in New York to protest the genocide, they raised the slogans of "never again for anyone" and "not in our names," reflecting their deep understanding of this principle, do no harm. In the same vein, millions have marched, peacefully occupied, or otherwise disrupted business as usual with genocidal Israel, calling for a ceasefire, lifting the siege, and ending complicity. Citizens of quasi-democratic states like yours have an ethical obligation to strive within their spheres of relative influence to end complicity in Israel's settler colonial apartheid regime, and most urgently in its ongoing genocide. Ending complicity in grave human rights violations is a matter of duty, not discretion, particularly when one has the capacity to act to end such complicity without incurring undue harm to oneself. So a bit about BDS. Launched in 2005, the nonviolent BDS movement is led by the largest coalition in Palestinian society. It's inspired by the South African anti-apartheid struggle and the US civil rights movement, and it's rooted in a century of Palestinian popular resistance. It aims at ending Israel's regime of occupation and apartheid and upholding the inalienable rights of Palestinian refugees to return. Anchored in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the BDS movement categorically opposes all forms of racism, including Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. It targets complicity, not identity. A 2022 poll shows that 16% of all Jewish Americans support BDS, with the percentage rising sharply for those under 40. They understand that there's nothing Jewish about Israel's siege, ethnic cleansing, massacres, land theft, occupation, apartheid. There's nothing Jewish about Israel's siege, ethnic cleansing, massacres, land theft, apartheid, occupation, or genocide, and therefore there's nothing anti-Jewish in supporting BDS to end these crimes and systems of injustice. The BDS movement encapsulates the Palestinian consensus in what it asks of the solidarity movement, and those are two things. First, respect and advocate for the comprehensive rights of the Palestinian people, including the right of refugees to return. Two, end all complicity in Israel's regime of oppression. Over the last 19 years, the BDS movement has built a massive network worldwide, supported by trade unions, farmers' associations, racial, social, gender, climate justice movements, together representing tens of millions. Well before the genocide, BDS played a major role in compelling large multinationals such as Veolia, Orange, G4S, CRH, Pillsbury, and others to end complicity in Israel's crimes. It recently forced Intel, or played a very important role in forcing Intel to scrap its ideologically motivated plan to invest $25 billion in the Israeli economy in the midst of genocide. McDonald's, one of our favorite targets, is suffering loss real loss of revenue and share value due to global BDS campaigning. Mainstream churches in South Africa, the US, have endorsed BDS or divested from complicit companies. Tens of thousands of academics, artists, athletes around the world have supported the call for boycotting Israel. The military embargo has really gone viral, spreading from Colombia to Canada to Spain to Wallonia and Belgium. Malaysia has banned Israel-bound ships from docking in its ports following a campaign led by BDS Malaysia. But let me focus a bit on divestment. BDS partners or trade unions that support BDS have played a large role in the divestment of giant sovereign funds in Norway, Luxembourg, Netherlands, New Zealand, and elsewhere from complicit companies and banks. City councils in several countries, especially in Norway, Ireland, and elsewhere, have divested from companies complicit in Israel's crimes. Most recently, as was mentioned, USS, the UK's biggest private pension fund, has divested over $100 million of Israeli assets, including Israel bonds, following sustained pressure, especially from UCU members. In February, the world's largest sovereign fund, Norway's $1.6 trillion oil fund, divested entirely, some $500 million, from Israel bonds. And Norway's largest pension company, KLP, divested $69 million from Caterpillar due to its involvement in crimes. Two of the largest US churches, the United Methodist Church and the Presbyterian Church USA, have also divested from Israel bonds in May and July, respectively. Investing in apartheid Israel and in banks like Barclays and companies that enable its war crimes, crimes against humanity, and now genocide against Palestinians, has always been unethical, even illegal. Now it's plainly reckless as well, and this is important to bring up in our messaging, especially with shareholders. Israel's economy is sinking, as attested by declining credit ratings, the mass flight of investments, and the near collapse of the high-tech industry. Genocide is costly also for the genocider. This is why the BDS movement has coined the hashtag #ShutDownNation to describe Israel's economy today. The student-led uprising in solidarity with Palestine has made the D in BDS more prominent than ever in the mainstream, as these valiant student and staff leaders have built on many years of the solidarity movement, especially PSC here in the UK, patiently, consistently, and strategically planting seeds of true solidarity. In light of Israel's ongoing genocide and the repeated ICJ rulings, what is the BDS movement calling for right now as a matter of priority for divestment? One, convincing businesses, cultural and academic organizations to declare themselves apartheid-free zones, excluding from procurement and divesting from companies that enable Israeli apartheid and support its genocidal war chest. Two, organizing strategic intersectional campaigns to pressure investment, pension funds and institutions, city councils, universities, churches, hospitals, culture institutions, etc., to adopt ethical procurement guidelines and ethical investment guidelines, if applicable, that exclude companies implicated in grave human rights violations anywhere in the world. These guidelines can then be applied to exclude companies involved in Israel's genocide and apartheid. Third and last, building broad coalitions to pressure governments to adopt meaningful sanctions, especially a comprehensive military embargo on Israel, as Jeremy has rightly mentioned. This requires broad grassroots and civil society pressure, especially by large trade unions. This is a legal obligation, as the UN Human Rights Council and human rights experts have affirmed. To conclude, we urge you to escalate these divestment and boycott efforts and never give up. Despite decades of oppression and a televised genocide, Palestinians have never given up. We continue to exist, to resist, and to insist on our full menu of rights. Channel your anger at Israel's genocide, your grief for its victims, and your support for Palestinian liberation into meaningful forms of solidarity that focus on cutting complicity. Divestment is at the center of that. Thank you.